You are listening to What the Flood, brought to you by Aon Edge, flood insurance that works for you. Hi everybody, I'm Casey Castagna, and welcome to this episode of What the Flood podcast. I'm very excited to have a dear friend of mine on today. This is Gregg Sutton. He is a homeowners association president, and I'm just delighted for him to join.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Yes. So Gregg, we wanted to have you on because it's so important for us to share the voice of the customer with our insurance agents and with our brokers. So I think it was late summer that we were at the pool. I swam over to you because I heard you talking about flood insurance.
That is correct.
So before we dive into all of that, how about you just tell me a little bit about yourself? How long have you been the president of the Condominium Association?
Well, I do reside in Brookhaven with my 3 little dogs, and I'm a small business owner. I have served on the board since 2003 and took over the board president position in 2007, which I still serve as.
That's fantastic. So we have some experience here.
A little experience, learned a little bit here and there. So
that's awesome. Yeah. So what would you say your top 3 priorities are as the president?
First and foremost, we would say taking care of the resident needs, making sure the community is maintained, budget, making sure the bills are paid, expenses, and just keeping an overall eye on the community to make sure everything is in order and that we do follow all the guidelines set forth by the HOA and pay our flood insurance.
So what do you wish that you knew about insurance for condominium associations when you first became the president?
I became president in 2007, so I had already served 5 years on the board. So I was fairly familiar with the insurance. I wished I had known more when I purchased my unit in 2002 as far as what is covered by the owner's responsibility versus the HOA responsibility, and especially the cost involved and everything that entails of flood insurance. That came as a shock to a lot of people when we started having flooding.
Yes, and that was going to be my next question. You know, some of your first introductions to the flood insurance piece, if it was through your realtor, through your lender, or when community was remapped. So it sounds like a lot of this was based on.
I was actually told at closing that we were in a floodplain.
Okay.
However, I had lived and worked on the opposite side of the creek for 2 years prior and had seen whenever there would be a rainstorm, the creek would get high, but I had never seen it flood. So when I purchased there at closing, they did say you are in a floodplain. I really didn't think anything about it. 2005, when we flooded for the first time, was like, oh, wow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that's the thing too. So with lenders, they'll require there to be insurance when it's considered a special flood hazard area. So right. Whether it's an A or V, of course, you know, V's coastal, so y'all are in some type of A zone. But it's still also important though for even if you're not a special flood hazard area, or if it's not mapped as an A zone, it could still flood.
Right.
And
right.
that may be something that y'all have seen happen as well. So we can get into that in a little bit. But I guess so when you were closing on your house, is that one of the first times like you heard the term RCBAP, Residential Condominium Building Association Policy?
First time, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so at that point, you're trying to figure out, well, what's my responsibility? What's the association's responsibility?
Right.
Yeah. And I do think that it's important for our listeners just to, you know, understand that with an RCBAP, whether it's underwritten through the National Flood Insurance Program, which we, you know, otherwise known as the NFIP, or through a private market. So this policy is going to offer protection against direct physical loss by or from a flood for the building. This includes the residential condominium, including all the units within the building and the improvements within the units. That could be awnings, canopies, blinds, carpets, furnaces,
right.
You know, permanently installed cupboards, bookcases, mirrors, and a lot more. So,
yeah.
The RCBAP also protects an association's personal property, but not the individual's personal property.
Correct. We usually at our annual meeting,
Mhm.
when everyone's there or any kind of communication we send out regarding the annual meeting, that is one thing we do cover, that speak to your agent. This is the insurance that is required. As far as the flood insurance, it is what it is.
Mhm.
It's set forth, the rates are set by FEMA, I believe. And
Yeah, if you have the NFIP policy. And
Yeah.
that's the thing too. And I think, just for our agent and broker listeners, or even if we have maybe some other customers out here listening, if you do want to talk about your insurance, make sure that you're talking to your licensed property and casualty insurance
Correct.
agent.
Correct.
As in your role, it's not to solicit or sell the insurance. It's just to make sure that you work with the insurance agent
Right.
on behalf of
On
the
behalf of the
association.
the entire association. Yes.
Exactly. So let's see if we talk about just coverage limits for a minute, because I know this can sometimes be complicated. But when we look at coverage limits under an RCBAP, the maximum amount of building coverage that can be purchased is the lesser of 100% of the replacement cost, or the total number of condominium units times 250,000. So we will see this with both the NFIP and then also private flood policies. So in this case, there may be co-insurance that can result when the replacement cost exceeds the available max limit. So I think, it's important just, again, you're the voice of our customer, what has helped you navigate some of these more complex situations?
We actually just had this with two homeowners with two different lenders,
Mm-hmm.
and their lenders came back and said that we did not have enough flood coverage. We have the maximum that we are required to have. And it went back and forth between our agent, the lender, the homeowner's agent, the homeowner, and then it had to be broken down. It was like a group policy. They wanted a line item by line item policy. And when they got that, which all equaled the same amount that we already had, they were fine. It's done.
It sounds like you have a fantastic insurance agent who is able to help resolve that for you. So
Yes.
that's fantastic.
Yes.
So oftentimes we will see that certain buildings are mapped in those high-risk flood zones, but others are not. And I think we've kind of hit on that a little bit earlier. So
Right.
that's something that y'all have, right?
Yes, we have.
Just as we kind of look at that, that's again where agents just play such an important role.
Agreed.
In, helping everybody, the insured, the homeowners, everybody understand.
Yep. Totally agree.
Yeah. And I also think, when you just look at the different options out there, I know we've touched on the NFIP, we are seeing more and more markets enter into the private flood space. So with risk rating 2.0 coming up, you may not be familiar of what that is, but the NFIP is going to start re-rating the complete methodology for how properties are currently priced. So we may see some renewals go up, we may see some go down. So I would just encourage any agent or broker, as you're working with your insureds, if you've only ever accessed the NFIP market, talk to some other markets and see if you can, access the private market for your client. So we do know that the threat of flooding can occur anywhere, regardless if you're in a special flood hazard area or just a regular BC X zone. They all flood. Can you share just maybe some of the challenges? Because I think you had mentioned that y'all have experienced a flood before.
Yes.
So what were some of the challenges that happened post-flooding, and how did that flood insurance play a role?
We actually flooded 3 times within 18 months,
Okay.
32 of our townhomes. The first time was when there was a hurricane, I believe it was in 2004, 2005, and the tropical storm moved over Atlanta, and it actually stalled directly over our complex.
So there was a hurricane out in
Florida,
Florida,
right,
and then it
moved
became a
up.
tropical storm as it came.
And that was the first experience we had had with flooding. And luckily, we had a very good property manager at the time who was very hands-on, very diligent. He worked with the board this is our first time. We didn't know anything about this. Worked with our agent, who worked with the restoration company, and everything just really came together. We had, of course, lots of phone calls, meetings, emails, but they really came together. And again, it was that partnership between the HOA board, our manager, our agent, and the restoration company that made it so easy to get it done. Now, it did take a while, and there was a lot of cleanup. You got 32 homes.
Yeah,
That's a lot.
that does.
Yeah.
We have another episode of this podcast out there, and we were talking to some claim adjusters, and it was some of the tips that they had were just to make sure that if you are refinancing or if you change lenders, to make sure that they're endorsed to your flood policy or to the RCBAP, because that's a big part of once that check is cut.
Yes.
You want to make sure that you get the check, but then the lender also has to sign off on it
Right.
before you can utilize those funds to help with the cleanup as well. So
Yeah.
I think that's always important to note as well. What would you say, just working with agents, what are some do's and don'ts that you have for working with community associations?
One thing I would say is just tell the client the truth. It is what it is. This is how much it's going to cost. Yet this is why it's required. But tell your clients the truth, why it is that way. Answer their questions, and even tell the board. Sometimes we don't know, or we don't want to hear the answer we think we're going to get.
Right.
But once you break it down and explain everything, it's like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense.
I have found that, because nobody likes to deliver news that may not be pleasant, or there may be I know just in my role, if somebody wants coverage that's outside of what can be offered, you hate to say no, or if it's cost more than they thought, you hate to deliver that.
Yes.
But to your point, I think being transparent, being upfront, being available, those three things are really going to just help secure that relationship.
Agreed.
And just kind of roll with the changes as they come along.
Agreed. Totally agree.
Thank you so much for being on.
Well, thank you so much.
You've been a terrific voice of the customer.
Thank you for listening to What the Flood podcast, brought to you by Aon Edge. For more information about our programs, please visit aonedge.com. For questions, please email us at edgefeedback@aon.com. Until next time, thanks for listening.